Let's continue with part 3. So far we've looked at things that pretty much always trigger the subjunctive, and often there's no way to get around it. However, not all the subjunctive works so rigidly. Sometimes you can step on a trigger but still have a choice over whether you use the subjunctive. Now, one of these opportunities arises when you're talking about whether or not something happens normally. For example, let's take the word cuando. Now, cuando will sometimes trigger the subjunctive and sometimes will not. Let's compare these two sentences. We have, I drink lots of margaritas when I'm in Mexico. Below it we have, I will drink lots of margaritas when I'm in Mexico. Both sentences use the word when, meaning cuando, but only one will trigger the subjunctive. The key to understanding it is that whenever you are describing behavior that normally happens, usually happens, always happens, this will not trigger the subjunctive. This is what is happening in this first sentence, because what it's implying is I usually drink lots of margaritas when I'm in Mexico, or I normally drink lots of margaritas, I always drink lots of margaritas when I'm in Mexico. This first sentence is describing normal, regular, repetitive behavior, whereas the second sentence is not doing that. It's saying I will drink lots of margaritas when I'm in Mexico, but there's no indication that that's ever happened before. Now, in this example, where you are not expressing this idea of normally, always, or usually, this will trigger the subjunctive after the word cuando. Let's look at some more examples. In this sentence we have, I'm happy when you're here, followed by, I'll be happy when you're here. Now the first one is saying that I'm normally happy when you're here, usually always happy when you're here. This is describing normal behavior. So we have, estoy feliz cuando estás aquí. You can see that after the word cuando, there is no subjunctive, because we're saying that this is normal for us, repetitive, normal, regular, usual behavior, that whenever you're here, I'm happy. But in the second example, we have I will be or I'll be happy when you're here. Now, this one will trigger the subjunctive after when, because there's no indication that maybe we've ever met before. Maybe we've been in contact online and you're going to arrive and we'll meet for the first time, and I'm saying I'll be happy when you're here. It doesn't have that same repetitive, usual, always, normally feel about it. So this one would be voy a estar feliz cuando estés aquí, when you might be here. Let's continue. I always call you whenever I'm in Mexico. Now here this one is much clearer because we have the word always. So this is repetitive behavior, normal, usual behavior, that we always call you whenever we're in Mexico. So we have siempre te llamo cuando estoy en México. Here we have no subjunctive, cuando estoy en México. But if we contrast that with I'll call you when I'm in Mexico, now we've lost that sense. It may be repetitive, it may be not, it may be normal, it may be not. Maybe this is the first time I'm ever going to Mexico and I'm telling you that when I'm in Mexico, I'll call you. So the difference here is voy a llamarte cuando esté en México. I'm going to call you when I might be in Mexico. Can you see the difference there? How one is clearly describing regular normal behavior, that I always call you whenever I'm in Mexico or when I'm in Mexico, whereas the other is not so clear. Look at this next one. I normally say hello to Francisco when I see him around here. Now that could be equally I always say hello or I usually say hello to Francisco when I see him. So we have normalmente le digo hola a Francisco cuando lo veo. No subjunctive here at all this is just the regular verb when I see him. However, if we were instead to say, when I see him, I'll say hello. Again, maybe it's the first time we'll ever see him. There's no sense of repetitive, normal, usual behavior in this phrase. So, after the word cuando, we're going to have cuando lo vea. Voy a saludarle. Going to say hello to him. You can see that instead of cuando lo veo, we've switched into the subjunctive. Cuando lo vea. Whenever or when I might see him, I'm going to say hello. So what we have here is the key principle behind it. If you're describing something that normally happens, regular, repetitive, usual behavior, then there's no subjunctive required after the word cuando. Let's run a little drill. All you have to do is decide if you would use the subjunctive or not after the word when in the following sentences. So we have here, I kiss my wife every day when I get home from work. If you were saying that in Spanish, would you use the subjunctive after the word when? This one is no subjunctive because it's regular or describing regular, usual behavior. I normally, usually, always kiss my wife every day when I get home from work. I hug my kids when they need my support. Subjunctive or no subjunctive? This one is no subjunctive. Again, we're describing regular behavior. I normally, usually, always hug my kids when they need my support. I'm going to tell you what happened when I see you. This one would trigger the subjunctive. It doesn't have the same feel or clarity of the others. We don't know if it's normal behavior or not. If we changed it to, I always, let's change like this. I always tell you what happened when I see you. Usually or normally tell you what happened when I see you every day after work. Now we have very regular, very normal, usual behavior, and so the subjunctive won't be triggered. However, I'm going to tell you what happened when I see you doesn't have that same feel about it, and it would trigger the subjunctive. What about this one? I can do it when I get home. This one would trigger the subjunctive. I don't know when I'll be there. This again would trigger the subjunctive. Finally, let's compare and contrast these two. I love to surf when I'm on vacation. Would you use the subjunctive or not? This one is no subjunctive. We're implying that I normally love to surf, usually love to surf, always love to surf when I'm on vacation. However, I'm going to try surfing when I'm on vacation. This one would trigger the subjunctive. You see, it's not nearly as clear. For all we know, it could be the first time that you're ever going to try surfing. So I'm going to try surfing when I'm on vacation. There's no more information than that. We're not describing or making it clearly implied that this is regular behavior for us. So after the word when, this will trigger the subjunctive. Now this concept in Spanish isn't just limited to the word cuando. It also applies to many other words as well. I have a list for you of the most common ones you'll come across. We have cuando, which is when, después de que is after, hasta que, until, mientras, while, and tan pronto como, meaning as soon as. The same principle applies to all the words in this list. Sometimes they will trigger the subjunctive, sometimes they won't. It depends on whether or not the behavior you are describing is regular, normal behavior or not. So in part 4 coming up next, I'll give you examples of how that exact same principle is going to apply to the other words in this list.